and welcome to the Arsenal Women Arsecast with me, your host Tim Stillman, convening an emergency pod on the January transfer window. And I think you will understand very well why there is an emergency pod on the January transfer window. And I've abandoned my plans to go to London Colney today for Renée Slegers' press conference to record this, because Thursday evening was quite exciting, wasn't it? And we were in the eye of the storm a little bit. So obviously, Arsenal made quite a big deadline day signing in the kind of closing minutes. Also lost a player as well. Gained another player earlier in the day, which we already knew about. And I was all set to do a podcast about her with another guest, but that's going to be confined to the drafts folder, or whatever the podcast equivalent of a drafts folder is. So Jamie isn't available today because she is going to go to London Colney for Renée Slegers' press conference, so she'll be there. And we thought we really had to do a pod about this, quite frankly. So I'm kind of hosting it, but I'm kind of the guest as well. And it's actually going to be Andrew who's going to be asking me the questions to get the kind of meat of the podcast and to get all of the information to you about how everything went down in, frankly, probably the weirdest and most hectic transfer window I've ever worked on. So, Andrew, welcome to your show.
Thank you, Tim. Now, this one is all yours, so I'm just here to facilitate the discussion. I'm happy to do that and ask the questions and hopefully get to the bottom of what has been a very interesting transfer window. So let me ask you first, why is this the most hectic transfer window you've worked on in all the many transfer windows you have worked on? Obviously, a lot has happened in this month. The Renée Slegers situation, how much of an impact did that have on what happened in this window and what Arsenal were able to do, and perhaps when they were able to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it feels a long time ago now, but Renée Slegers was appointed the manager actually in the middle of January. I mean, it was mainly tied up at the beginning of January, but that was always going to have a lag effect on any business that Arsenal were going to do. And our understanding was very much it'd be quite a quiet window, maybe one in, one out. So Catherine Kuhl went to AS Roma. That was very, very obvious from several months ago that she was going to leave. But yeah, appointing the actual manager took up, I believe, quite a lot of resource and time for the beginning of the window. So anything that was going to happen quite late. Now, most Arsenal fans will tell you that what they really wanted from this window was another wide player, because Lena Hurtig has been injured pretty much all of the 2.5 years she's been at the club, and Arsenal have basically always had three wingers as a result. So everyone really wanted a wide player. And we weren't really sure if that was what Arsenal were going to get in the end. They obviously did in the final minutes of the window, and probably not the one that people expected. But the reason, Andrew, this one was so weird to work on is in terms of like reporting on these transfers, like nothing falls into our lap. Like I go digging for everything. And sometimes the world is a lovely sunny place and someone just says to me, Arsenal are signing this player, go check it out.
Yeah.
And then it's reasonably easy to get that double and triple sourced, because when you're presenting information, i.e. I know this, people are much more likely to say, yeah, you're correct.
So, yeah, rather than, have you got anything for me, speculatively exactly. Just asking, is anything going on?
Exactly that. And in this particular window, everything turned out to be speculative. And I knew that was coming, because if you imagine us like a striker, we've been running hot on our XG the last few windows. We've caught pretty much everything. But a lot of that's down to happenstance. So I always had in the back of my mind that we were reporting-wise, due a tough window. And I chased a few things down some blind alleys. So I kind of started off. We knew that the Brazilian attacker, Carolyn, was going to become available in this window. She'd been in the US and she wanted to move to Europe. And I suspected that Arsenal might be interested. I chased that up. I don't think they really were. I think that was one phone call and done. So I spent a lot of energy on that. And actually, she went to Manchester City, effectively a Chloe Kelly replacement. Then a bit later in the window, I'd had some conversations about Arsenal being in for a fullback, and but not specified right or left back. And I got that information around about the time that I got some information about Laura Wienroither, who we'll talk about a bit later, being up for sale and not being in the manager's plans. And so that's another way that you're beginning to see the manager make her mark, and you're beginning to see the players that she wants and that she doesn't want. And so I put 2 and 2 together, I think quite logically, but got 5. So when I was told that a right back would probably be leaving, and I was told we were looking for a full back, I started investigating right backs. But it turned out that Arsenal were buying a left back, so we didn't catch that one, Jenna Nighswonger, because I was speculating and inquiring about right backs.
Sure.
And so that was another blind alley. And then, I mean, we'll go into the Chloe Kelly stuff later, but then it became clear Thursday afternoon that deadline day was going to be seat of the pants stuff, and it really was. So but in terms of the manager as well, I think you'll see her fingerprints on things more in the summer.
I was going to ask you, because obviously she's been at the club and she was part of the coaching staff beforehand, so it's not like she's come in sort of blind and has needed time to form her own opinions on some of the players. I guess it's a question of her being able to implement those ideas with the security of getting the big job, if you like, and then she can start to make her mark on the squad in various ways. Yeah,
definitely. So some of the conversations I've had, but more around the summer. The summer, I think you'll see a higher turnover. There are some key contracts coming up anyway. The defence needs a touch up. They probably need a midfielder. They probably need an attacker or two. So it's going to be, I think, quite a busy summer. And I'm kind of told they're keen on bringing the age profile of the squad down a bit, because they've got 4 wingers who are 29 and 30. Their starting central midfielders are 35 and 32. So there are areas of the squad where they need to get younger.
Yeah.
And I think Renee's quite keen to do that. But like with someone like Laura Wienroither, for example, Renee's job on the coaching staff before she took the main role was she was like the kind of Carlos Cuesta of the operation.
Sure.
She was on the iPad with the players individually. So she knows them all very well, and she knows their strengths and weaknesses intimately. And I think one thing that's important to her is that fullbacks can invert into midfield. And I think that's why Laura Wienroither was told, from what I'm told, no uncertain terms, that she should look for another club, that she wasn't part of Renee's plans. So, because when she first took the job, I think a lot of people thought, okay, she's worked with Jonas at 2 clubs now. They have they still have a very strong relationship. She took over from him at Rosengård. So there was a real temptation, I think understandably, to think, okay, this is Jonas Mark II. I think we're seeing that's not the case, that they have similar ideas about football, but now her feet are under the table. I think you're really going to see that there are some key differences as well.
But before we get into the window then and what happened, and just sort of sticking with Renee Slegers here, because, she now has this huge opportunity for her in her own career. And you said when it comes to Laura Wienroither that she was told in no uncertain terms. Is there a need perhaps to demonstrate a measure of ruthlessness as the head coach that maybe she couldn't when she was working on staff? That I don't mean she's just sort of going to come in and start, throwing her weight around us. Yeah, exactly. Not that. But I think there has to be, when you get a job like this, a measure of authority that comes with it. And part of that is making decisions. It's not being terrible to people. It's not being mean to people. It's just doing your job in the way that top level sport, and this is the top level of women's football, it demands, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it's worth saying she's managed a big club before. She managed Rosengård in Sweden. For those of you not that familiar with women's football, the context there is Sweden. They've moved more into League Eredivisie type league in the men's context, in that there's loads and loads of talent there, but now it tends to come to Europe quite young. But historically, Swedish teams there are several Swedish teams that have won the Champions League. Things have changed, but it's managing Rosengård in Sweden is a big deal, because it's a big league and they're expected to win the league. So she does have experience of managing a big club. I think what she's been quite clever about is that came to a bit of a natural end. And she decided, okay, I want to have a look in another league, because she was quite settled in Sweden. She played there I believe her partner's Swedish, and she speaks the language and all of that. So, like, she's Dutch, which probably plays into the ruthlessness part as well, without wishing to stereotype too much. I imagine if you have that type of conversation with Renée Slegers, you don't leave. You don't leave the room not knowing what she wants and what she said. But
between Dutch and Scandinavian, I'd say it's fairly upfront.
Yes, indeed.
With all due respect to our European chums.
Yes, I don't think we're saying that pejoratively.
Not at all. Not at all. No.
And so she decided, well, actually, I want to go and have a look at another league now. And she decided I might take a backroom job somewhere and just have a little look at the setup. And obviously, Jonas, big fan of hers, worked with her before, came calling, and she was like, great, I'll go and do like a backroom job at Arsenal and I'll just have a little look at how an even bigger operation works. And she's done that for just over a year. Then she's been interim. So she's kind of slowly climbed back towards this role. And yeah, I think definitely, like, she gets on with the players well because of the job she used to do as well. But a big part of her approach is really interesting, is like she's got a real player engagement approach. So she asks them, like, what do you think we should do in this game? What do you think? Like, what do you think was going wrong under Jonas that we need to correct? And they do things like she talks about, she doesn't really go in the dressing room because she leaves that to the players. She allows player meetings during training, which she won't listen into. She'll walk off and do some kick-ups and whatnot because she was a very good player in her day. But she had to retire when she was 26. But also she'll do stuff like she told us that just before a team meeting, she'll randomly grab two players and she'll be like, this is how the other team does their goal kicks. What do you think? You're going to be out on the pitch doing this. What do you think we should do from their goal kicks? And she does that, first of all, because she says the players have good ideas, but also it's a way of keeping them engaged because they have buy-in. But at the same time, if you know you might randomly get picked on, it keeps your brain going, you know. Sure. If you know, like, you know, you're not gonna, you might, you know, it's a bit like when you're in class at school and you know you might get picked on, you know. you don't fall asleep at the back next to the radiator. So she's got a very interesting approach like that. But I definitely think that there will be and needs to be a measure of ruthlessness. And I don't, from everything I've seen speaking to her and about her, I do not doubt that at all.
Okay. Well, let's look at the big story then of transfer deadline day, and that is Arsenal bringing in Chloe Kelly on loan from Manchester City. She only has one start, I think, in the WSL this season for Man City. What's happened there? Why did her situation develop the way it did to be frozen out in the way that she's frozen out as a very experienced and high profile player?
Yeah, so there was a fallout with the coach, Gareth Taylor. That's quite public, and the player herself made it public the day before deadline day. Stuff you'll be very familiar with the men's game, where a player is stuck at a club they don't want to be at. There's 24 hours to the deadline, and they fire up the notes app and stuff gets put on Instagram. That's the way of these things. That's exactly what happened here. But yeah, I mean, there are some kind of stories percolating about, like, Gareth Taylor not being happy with her effort in training and things like that. It started to percolate the end of last season, so nothing really happened in the summer because it was kind of right at the end. Because Chloe Kelly was every minute of every game for City, so to see her on the bench at all was a story. And all of a sudden, she started being on the bench, and she hadn't been on the bench for 2 years at all. And so it was like, okay, what's going on here? But I don't think it had really come to a head for there to be a summer move, but it's continued into this season. She's getting, like, you know, what our American cousins would probably call garbage minutes, you know, coming on the Sterling minutes, you know, 5 minutes to go when you're either 5-0 up or 3-0 down type thing. She started the second leg of a Champions League qualifier when they were 5-0 up, like, that kind of almost derisory type
pointed
stuff.
And
obviously the Euros are coming up, and Chloe's been reasonably fortunate that England don't actually have a lot of attacking depth at the moment, and there have been other injuries. So she's kept her place in the England squad, and Serena Wiegman said like earlier this season, she's got credit in the bank, but it was a situation that couldn't go on. So it comes to January, she definitely wants to leave because she needs her place in the Euro squad. And the tricky bit for Man City was the club that showed the biggest interest were Manchester United, who are A, competing directly with City in the table, and B, are their City rivals. And they definitely don't want to give Chloe Kelly to Manchester United, so they weren't going to do that.
Is that dynamic in the women's game as pronounced? Because, I know from the coverage that you have done that there has been a willingness, let's say, from an Arsenal perspective to do some deals with Tottenham down the years, which haven't had the same or wouldn't have the same impact as if it were, the men's team. Yeah,
it's getting that way more. But that's more because, I'll say this as diplomatically as possible, Tottenham are not competing with Arsenal.
Sure.
Whereas Manchester United are competing with Manchester City. So there was also interest from Brighton as well, but I don't think Chloe Kelly wanted to go there really. So it's quite opportunistic of Arsenal to come in quite late when they're down a wide player. Caitlin Ford went off injured in the last game. Lena Hurtig again looks to be injured. Arsenal have been quiet about that situation, which I imagine has been about not showing their hand too much in the market. And so they've come in quite late opportunistically. And then that gives City a choice, because City don't want Chloe Kelly to go to Arsenal either, really, because Arsenal are competing with Manchester City in the league and in other tournaments as well. The teams might play each other in the Champions League, yeah. The draw is to be made. They could face each other in the quarter-final. But for City, once Chloe Kelly released the statement on her social media channels on Wednesday evening, they knew it was untenable. She was very strong on it. She was saying, this is unfair. I'm being blocked. This is unprofessional now. Like, she really kind of, forced it through. So City knew they had to cut the cord. But then it comes down to, do you give them to the competitor that also happens to be your local rival, or do you give them to the competitor who is a competitor but is not your City rival and perhaps has fewer optics? And by the way, Man City have got some defensive injuries. Arsenal have got a defender they don't want anymore. So while technically those deals are separate, make no mistake that's a wheel greaser to say to Man City, you kind of need a right back. We've got a right back we don't want. Maybe we'll scratch your back, you scratch ours type thing.
Sure. A little marriage of convenience type situation. Chloe Kelly obviously has Arsenal history, having been at the club previously. So, there'd be no issues, I guess, with settling in and finding her way around and dealing with, the players and obviously some England teammates in there as well. But what can Arsenal expect from her? Because she's still only 27. Is she eligible for the Champions League? Yep. So there you go. What can they expect, and what can her presence in the squad do in terms of adding depth and maybe giving Renée Slegers the ability to use different players in different positions? Yeah,
there's another wrinkle here, which is the player I believe wanted to go to Manchester United, and the reason. So she's from London. She's actually QPR fan, but she came through the Arsenal Academy when she was younger. But I think geographically it was a bit more convenient. And to be honest, at United, she probably starts every game. At Arsenal, it's probably going to be more of a rotation. And the other wrinkle there is Beth Mead is there, who she is literally competing for the same spot in the England team. So it's kind of not 100% ideal. But at this stage, she needs to get in the squad, and she can worry about getting in the starting 11 later. She needs to be in the squad. So it's kind of not ideal that she plays the same position as the person she's competing for England. But for Arsenal, they have been down a wide player for a few years now. And the last couple of games, like at Chelsea, when you're 1-0 down and it's 0-0 and you're chasing a goal, Arsenal put Alessia Russo on the wing because they just didn't have another winger. And whereas Chelsea bring on like 4 brilliant attackers, Arsenal bring on 2. So for Chloe Kelly, even if she doesn't start every game, she will be involved in every game. And there's the additional kind of thing there where she's going to be cup tied for both cup competitions. And that just gives Renée the chance, like, possibly to start Chloe in most of the WSL games. And then, when she rotates a bit for the cup games, Chloe Kelly's not going to be available for those, for the domestic cups. So,
sure.
It gives her another very, very welcome option. The other thing is Chloe Kelly is a reliable goal scorer, always has been during her career, and Arsenal could do with another one of those as well as Alessia Russo. So, but the other thing you're getting, even if you put aside the fact that she probably wanted to go to Manchester United and it probably came down to it's Arsenal or purgatory, she really wants that Euros spot. So this isn't a Raheem Sterling situation in that I do not believe the player is, washed, to use a word. She's 27. I don't think that's a concern. And unlike Sterling, who's probably given up on his England place, for example, she's fighting tooth and nail to get in that squad. So I think you're going to get an incredibly motivated player, and one who, let's face it, if there hadn't been a fallout with the manager, she'd still be playing every single minute of every single game for Man City. That's the level that she's at. And I don't honestly think she'll find it too difficult to find that level again.
Before we move on from Chloe Kelly, I mean, just, on that, maybe some people will have a concern that if she's fallen out with this coach, that might speak to some underlying disciplinary issues or behavioural issues or things like that. I mean, to what extent will Arsenal have done their groundwork on that? And, I'm not an expert in the women's game, but it does strike me that the Man City manager is somebody with whom people tend to fall out on a fairly frequent basis.
Yeah. I don't think it's a huge concern, to be honest. She's never really fallen out with any other coach. Sarina Wiegman is the England manager. She's a very tough taskmaster. She would happily freeze someone out, and she hasn't. In fact, she's continued to pick Chloe Kelly, even though she's not really playing. So I'm not, and like I say, the context of she just has to get back into the England squad, and I do think she'll give it absolutely everything. But I mean, why don't I talk a little bit as well about reporting on the actual transfer yesterday?
Yeah, please, yeah.
Because it all emerged very, very late. And I asked a few people kind of lunchtime-ish, early afternoon. I was a bit like, is it done? Is it over? Is there a snake in the grass? And no one said to me that something was happening, but no one would tell me nothing was happening. So I was like, okay, balls, that means I have to keep working. Because honestly, from a selfish point of view, I'd love someone to just say, no, don't worry about it.
Game over, yeah.
Go and make yourself a healthy meal and watch some TV. Instead, I end up eating a kebab staring at WhatsApp. But
hey, there are worse jobs in the world, Tim. Let's face it.
but yeah, so it all came down very, very late, and probably about 8 p.m. kind of became aware that City just were not going to countenance United. They agreed the deal with Arsenal quite quickly because I think they were just not united at that stage, and it became clear to the player, Arsenal or nothing. And then probably around 9 p.m. had solid indication the deal had been done, and it was about getting the paperwork done in time. But Arsenal announced it at 11 p.m. on the dot, which was the deadline. So it after what was a difficult window reporting wise, we got something. And after trying to report on the manager situation as well, which was really, really difficult because very few people knew about it and those people weren't talking. And it wasn't until the very end we kind of got that, but we focused more actually on getting the interview with Renee. We thought that was like a better way to go. So you guys listening to this and who read the site could we could get some FaceTime with her and talk to her, because it wasn't an earth-shattering exclusive that she was going to be the manager, I don't think. So yeah, it was after some frustration in terms of reporting. We were pretty on it last night, which was a bit of a relief, completely selfishly speaking.
There was another signing as well, a defender, Jenna Nighswonger, who comes in from Gotham FC. As you said, you were looking at right backs. Arsenal have brought in a left back. Obviously, that adds depth in that position. But what are maybe the other effects of her arrival, and what sort of a player are Arsenal getting for this position?
Yeah, she's a very attacking left back. She was a left winger at college. She's played a bit in midfield. So what I said earlier about for Renee, it's very important that the fullbacks can go into midfield. She's played there. A bit like Katie McCabe, in that like she's a left back, but really her job is kind of at the other end of the pitch. And what it means is, because one of the first things Renee did was use Steph Catley as a centre back. So Steph Catley was one of the left backs for like 4.5 years, but Renee really wanted a left-footed centre half, so she put Steph Catley in at left centre back. So she's now considered a centre back. That meant that Katie McCabe was the only left back, and Katie McCabe had started the last 27 games for Arsenal at left back. Katie is never injured. However, from time to time, she's suspended, Andrew.
Really?
And yeah, and she happens to be suspended at the moment for
an Irish blessing. I think she gave the referee.
Yes,
is that right?
Yeah. It reminds me a bit of. Do you remember Gennaro Gattuso and Joe Jordan when AC Milan played Spurs? Had a set to, and Gattuso's wife is Scottish, and he was asked about it afterwards. And he said, we were speaking Scottish to each other. She's suspended, and incidentally, her boot prints are all over the walls of the tunnel at Stamford Bridge at the moment. So that's a paint job. But the fact was she was basically the only left back. So Arsenal did need depth there. And with Laura going, Katie McCabe can play at right back as well. So that kind of frees her up both to play right back when she's needed there, but also to push her further forward because she can play on the left wing as well and kind of bolster the wide options when needed. So it's one of those signings that kind of makes has like a domino effect in different positions. It's like a good depth signing. She's a US international, so she's going to be very good. Kind of very attacking left back, and I'd say like it's a floor raiser, not a ceiling raiser type thing, but I think profile-wise, she's 24, and I think you're going to see a fair few 24-year-olds, people in that age bracket coming into the club probably over the summer and maybe the next window after that.
So overall then, looking at Arsenal's window with the two players who've come in, the players who've left, will Renée Slegers be satisfied with that? What is the feeling among the fan base around what Arsenal have done this window? And maybe we can expand that in a moment by talking about some signings that some of the other clubs have made, in particular Chelsea. I think what they've done. I'm not saying it vexes Arsenal fans, but certainly there is. It does. Okay, well, fair enough. Look, I think you can always look on, regardless of whether it's men's or women's. You can always look at other clubs and see what they do in the transfer window, and be a little envious, perhaps, of what's happened there. So we'll expand that out. But just based on what Arsenal have done, is it a satisfactory window?
I think they got there in the end. I think people will question the route. Like, why will we... Like, last January, because Arsenal had a big recruitment review about 2 years ago after they had a couple of scrappy windows where they didn't get everything they wanted and they were scrapping around on deadline day and stuff like that. And so they beefed up the recruitment staff. I do think, and this is kind of a speculation on my part, I do think they took too long over appointing Renee as the manager. I think that should have been done January the 1st, so that they could really focus on this window properly. Because last January, everything was done by like January the 5th. It was one in, one out, and it was all done in the first week of January. Whereas this time, it's been a bit of a scramble. And much like I keep pointing to the Raheem Sterling thing, like I said, as a player, I don't think that's right. But as a transfer, it definitely is. A lot of people will say, why on earth are we scrambling around for a loan deal that's signed with 1 minute of deadline day left? And I think with like Nighswonger, I think most people think, okay, good depth option. We needed that type thing, not earth shattering, but people really wanted a wide player. I really wanted a wide player. I just think it's been such a it's been such an issue for such a long time. And the thing is about the market for younger wide players opens up in the summer.
Sure.
There's a few that are going to be available. So, I think Arsenal will probably, have their oar in there a little bit. So it's a stopgap, but yeah, maybe we'll come on to this. There is a context about what our competitors are doing.
Sure. And look, I know you talked about this with Jamie in one of the episodes, but obviously Jonas Eidevall's comments were a little bit pointed about what's been going on behind the scenes, or what hasn't been going on behind the scenes at Arsenal. Is that something which is a significant issue for fans, or internally, is that something that Arsenal are paying attention to?
Definitely an issue for fans, yes. I think I'm certainly of the opinion it's time for like an individual sporting director. Obviously, there's Edu's position to be filled, and I'm sure that will be looked at once that's filled. Whoever replaces him will probably look at the whole structure of the club, and none of us know who that individual is going to be, so I can't say whether they'll say that. But I think the thing is that this is all around the growth of the women's game as well. The staff has ballooned, right? So Arsenal have been investing, a lot in staff and backroom staff. And and one of the things Jonas talked about, he said he found it overwhelming to have to like talk to all the people and all the different departments, and and I think that's probably true. And I don't think that's a massive mark against the club. It's just he kind of asked for a lot of extra staff. They gave it to him. Now it probably needs another person to tie it all together. Mm-hmm. And I do think people would question the level of planning again for this transfer window to be kind of scrambling around like that late on. And I think, a lot of people, I think slightly harshly, have questions about Claire Wheatley. For me, and this very outside perspective, I think it probably just needs someone else alongside her as much as anything, just because the operation's grown so much. But yeah, that is definitely a question, and I would be lying if I said to you that Arsenal women fans are coming out of this window, generally speaking, feeling really, really happy. I think a lot of people, and again, there is the context of what Chelsea have done as well, are looking at it and thinking, come on, we need to be more organised than this.
Yeah, that was the thing I was going to ask. Like, to what extent does what Chelsea have done, in the position that they're in, and then going out and being decisive and really raising the quality of their team and their squad, to what extent does that play into the frustrations that Arsenal fans might have about the way this window has gone and other windows might go, and maybe lead to some concern, let's say, about what Arsenal should and shouldn't do or could do in the summer window, when I think everybody accepts it's easier to do better business in the summer. But if you harbour concerns about the way decisions are being made, or plans are being made, or strategy is in place or not in place, when other clubs are really consolidating their power, if you like, that conversation is one which is perhaps a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, definitely. So Chelsea, they signed Naomi Girma, who is probably pound for pound the best centre-back in the world at the moment. Definitely a player Arsenal have had their eye on for a couple of years. Jonas Eidevall, massive fan. But, they've broken the world record to get her. Individually, I am okay with Arsenal not going to that for that player, just because I kind of think she wouldn't be an amazing partner for Leah Williamson. If you think Arsenal have Leah Williamson at the heart of their defence, this is not a perfect analogy. But if you think of Leah Williamson like Saliba, what does Saliba need? Saliba needs Gabrielle. And Girma is not Gabrielle. She's more of another Saliba, if that makes sense. So okay. I kind of think in terms of fit, I get it. And I'll come on to Kira Walsh in a minute, because that's slightly separate. Sure. But it's more the message that Chelsea, they've had an issue with, not an enormous issue, but a bit of an issue with that second centre-back for a couple of years. The one they had, Kadisha Buchanan, very good defender, hasn't quite totally popped at Chelsea, but she did her ACL in December, so what do? They just break the world record and get the best defender about in no messing, no kind of maybe this player can play there or whatever. the key, and that upset a lot of people, and I think I understand that. And obviously, there's the added. We go to Chelsea last Sunday and Chelsea parade her on the pitch before the game, which obviously I have every right to do.
Of course.
I am certain privately, and I don't blame them for this at all, I'm certain privately they loved doing it against Arsenal, which stands to reason. Arsenal would feel the same in the same scenario. So there's that kind of added context. The Keira Walsh one is more uncomfortable because that is definitely a player Arsenal have had long-standing interest in. We first reported it summer 2023. I think I can say now relatively comfortably that in summer 2023 she was up for that move, but Barca were not under any circumstances. Then we went in last summer 2024 with a deadline day bid of close to £1 million, which again, in terms of Arsenal's ambition, that says something good, that they were willing to break the world transfer record for Keira Walsh, and Barca thought about it but didn't. And it was a player that Arsenal were definitely keen on, and Chelsea have kind of stolen in late and done the rug pull. And actually the fee they're paying, because she's close to the end of her contract, it's a really interesting one because Barca have really strengthened their main rival for the Champions League. But she really wants to go, and with a few months left in the window, they've taken the decision, let's do it, and let's take like a good amount of money for a player we're about to lose for free and who doesn't want to be here anyway. But that's definitely a bit of a rug pull. I think, I don't want to say too much on it because I'm still gathering information and all of that. I kind of think, again, individually, I never really understood our big interest in that player because she just doesn't really fit the way Arsenal play. But if you want to make an argument to me that she's like the best deep-lying playmaker in the world, she probably is. And if you want to make the argument, if you can get one of the best players in the world, you just do it. I don't really have a good answer to that.
Yeah,
I and a lot of other Arsenal fans still had some doubts about how she really fit into the team. And I do get, I kind of get the sense that what Jonas really wants and what Renée really wants are slightly different. And there's a context as well that in the summer, I think Jonas knew his job was hanging by a bit of a thread. So, of course, he wants to break the world record for a 28. Well, not to get, she's 27 until she's 28. She's nearly 28. To get a player like, coming into peak years. But, of course, Jonas wants to throw the family silver at that because he knows his job's on the line. Whereas I think there's a slightly different context now. I do think the new manager wants, players that are slightly younger. And although the transfer fee is lower than what Arsenal offered in the summer, if stuff I've heard, which is a little bit hearsay, about the salary is right, then like the salary is massive. But again, whether you think Arsenal should have gone for Keira Walsh, Chelsea have just put the money down and got it done.
Yeah.
And the scary thing is that they've basically got the league wrapped up. And even though they've won the last 5 of them, it's pretty much always goes to the last day. They're pretty much always in a title fight. This year they're not. It's done. So when those Champions League games come around in the latter stages, they're going to be able to rotate. And it really looks to me like they're making a move, kind of like they know the league is done and they think they've got a really good shot at the Champions League. And actually they've gone and weakened the favourites a little bit. And that's the bit that is going to scare Arsenal fans, and rightly so, because it scares the bejesus out of me.
What does this demand then of Arsenal? Because we had a little bit of a conversation last week about, this, I don't want to be too general, but sometimes it feels like, not just in the women's team, but in the men's team, maybe institutionally, if that's the right way to put it, that we will make do with what we've got or what we can do in the transfer window without really, really pushing, particularly, I think, when it comes to attacking players. So if Chelsea are doing this now, to what extent, I know one window is just closed, so I don't want to ask too much about the summer window already. There's still a good chunk of the season to play. But what does that demand from Arsenal in terms of a response? Do you just sort of hold your hands up and say, well, what can we do? Or do you react to that in the best way that you possibly can in terms of strategy and investment?
That's the $1 million question, literally the $1 million question. That's the bar. Whether we like it or not, whether we have issues around sustainability in the women's game and, making our own team sustainable so they can stand on their own 2 feet, all of that, I think right and admirable and all of that, but that is the bar. That is who our competition is. That is who our domestic competition is. That is who our European competition is. And yeah, club's got a decision to make. Do we go there or do we not? And the issue for us as well, while Barcelona are dominating the women's game, we only see that really in the Champions League final, which they go and win 4-0 or something. But you don't really see it every week when they're walloping everyone in Spain 11-0, so you don't have to care about it. For Arsenal, every trophy they want to win, every trophy available to them, one way or another, you've got to beat Chelsea. And Arsenal, I think they showed in the game last week, Arsenal have got a really good coach. And I think there are real parallels to Arteta in what Arsenal have got with Renée Slegers. I think the summer we're about to see with them will probably bear some resemblance to summer 2021 with the men, where they were like, okay, straight, like we need to bring the age down, we need to bring certain types of player in. And that's one of the best windows, I think, in the men's team's modern history.
Sure.
And we all draw the line of that's when it started. And I think that's kind of what they're, broadly, I've made that analogy. I'm not saying that Arsenal are making that analogy, but like broadly what they're going to try and do. But, there's a bit of a rebuild coming for Arsenal just because of the age profile of the squad. It's going to be really interesting to see where they go and what they do with it. Like I said, they did put down £1 million or thereabouts for Kira Walsh. Like, I don't believe there is like a real cash flow problem. I don't believe that gap is very big. Arsenal and Man City have basically the same wage bill. And one of the kind of issues for Arsenal women is because they have a much bigger fan base than everyone else, bigger than Chelsea and Man City put together, quite frankly, both in an in-stadium sense and an online sense. That increases the scrutiny on you. Man City women, for example, have not won the league in 9 years this year, but very few people, they don't get questioned as much because frankly, and again, I'm trying not to say this pejoratively, they don't have a massive fan base and they don't generate as much discussion as Arsenal do. So the eyes are on Arsenal, and also because of Arsenal's long history in the women's game as well, and rightfully so. I personally, I want it to be that way. I want Arsenal to be held to a higher standard than the others. So I'm not whinging and complaining about that whatsoever. But yeah, there's a question. Are you going to go there? Do you go there? And the interesting thing for Chelsea as well is, as part of Todd Bowley's reign, should we call it, they've sold the women's team. So it's kind of like its funding is different, and we're kind of seeing like, how will that turn out? And well, we're seeing how it turns out. They're going to go even bigger. And particularly, I think, because they really think they've got a window to go and try and win the Champions League. And that's the sentence I used on the last podcast we did with Jamie. Are Arsenal trying to win the Champions League? That's the question. And for all of the external kind of talk around that, that's the underlying question on the exam paper. And I think we'll see a lot in the next year about what the response is going to be to that.
All right. Well, look, that's the transfer window and that's the discussion. And obviously there's plenty more to come from Arsenal women between now and the end of the season. So this is your pod. I'm going to say thank you for allowing me to ask all the questions. I'll let you sign off and let people know what's coming in the next few days.
Yeah, certainly. So obviously we'll have another podcast looking back at Arsenal play Manchester City twice. That's another wrinkle to all this business being done. So Arsenal play away at Manchester City on Sunday, which is going to be a very big game in terms of competing for the Champions League spot. So obviously Jamie and I will have a podcast for you on Monday about that. And then Arsenal play Manchester City again in the now called Subway League Cup semi-final at Meadow Park on Wednesday night. And those two teams will play each other for the right to play probably Chelsea in the final. So, yeah, a lot happening. And obviously we will be across it all. as we always are, we will be at Manchester City on Sunday. We've actually got a seat in the media theatre because the press box is full. And to be honest, in early February, I'm all right with that. So I'll be kind of watching. I'll be in the stadium, but like watching it on a cinema screen. But maybe I'll stick my neck out and kind of stand at the back of the press box or something. But yeah, we'll have all the stuff we always do. And so thank you very much for listening to this. And we'll speak to you on Monday.